Good morning. Glad to see everybody here this morning. We're studying First Corinthians, the eighth chapter, and we're going to talk about a new subject today. We're going to talk about idols and eating the meat off of idols, and this is a subject that was really an issue at Corinth, and Paul, obviously, from his writings, this was an issue that the Corinthians had questioned him about, and they needed some guidance in the situation. So, pretty much, Paul takes 13 verses and gives them some pretty solid guidance on what to do, and then. There's a lot of good information in this chapter about how we need to treat each other and the respect that we should have for each other. And this is even though the topic here it is something that we really don't get into much. I don't think anybody in here has had any meat that's been offered to idols in the last few years. But the concept that Paul's talking about here can be applied to a lot of different things in our Christian life. So before we go any further, I'd like for Kevin Cleveland, if you would, to lead our minds in prayer.
Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this day and for this opportunity we have to come and study your word. Pray, Father, bless us, bless Brother David, as he directs our minds, that we can glean something from this study and apply it to our everyday life. Thank you so much for your written word that is a lamp to our feet. Thank you for Jesus and his blood that was shed. In his name we pray. Amen.
All right, so let's look at verse 1. It says, "Now concerning things sacrificed to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puff up, but love edifies." So like I said, Paul has been asked for some guidance in this particular area. And the church there at Corinth, had a pretty much a mix of people. They had Gentiles and they had Jews, and this was a real problem, especially for the Gentiles, because they'd been reared up, in this adultery, and they worshipped idols, and this was something that is all that they knew, and they didn't think anything about it when they before they were converted to Christianity, but now this was a problem, because all of these idols that were out there, they were making animal sacrifices to. And we're going to get into this a little bit later, but and I really didn't realize until I started studying this a little bit how into idols that Corinth was. It wasn't just one idol; it was a lot of different idols that they were worshiping in that town. So these idols were were given animal sacrifices, and of course, obviously, it was a sacrifice to a false god. And when they did these sacrifices, they didn't burn up the whole animal. They would wrap like the legs and fat and the intestines and things like that. They were burned up in the fire on the altar, but there was still a lot of meat that was left there that could be consumed, and the remainder was eaten by the people that were given the sacrifices, and then they would invite their friends over, and they'd have a big meal.
That's not all. I've been digging on this too, and the two words are cheap meat. Apparently, what also happened a lot of times, there's two things. Number one, Jews in Corinth would also offer meat to the priest for sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, after the sacrifice took place and then the priests got their share, they would hand the rest of the meat back to the people who donated. Now, as far as the pagans were concerned, as you mentioned, some of them would get the meat back that they give, but other times they would sell the meat at a discount.
And you could go to the store and buy some.
You could go to the market and buy this meat that had been part of it was gone because it had been sacrificed. Cheap meat.
And the bad thing about it is that when they had these feasts, the Christians would be invited to it also. So they would go and have some of the have some of the feast also. So I mean, it was a real problem that we really don't have a good concept of what a problem that this was. And these newly converted Christians, they were really having a problem with this. And the leadership of the church there in Corinth, I would suspect, had gone to Paul and says, what do we do about this problem that we've got, and how do we treat these idols and the meat that's that's offered to them? So there's guidance that Paul had, obviously given to him by revelation, but also in Acts 15 and 29, it references I guess a council would be the word that the apostles had in Jerusalem, and they addressed this situation. If we read verses 28 and 29 of Acts 15, it says, "For it seemed good to the Holy Ghost and to us to lay upon you no greater burden than these necessary things, that ye abstain from meats offered to idols, and from blood, and from things strangled, and from fornication, from which ye keep yourselves. Ye shall do well, fare ye well." So basically, the apostles, in I guess consultation with the Holy Spirit and what was revealed to them, they gave some guidance on this, and the guidance was, don't do it. It may not be a problem for some people, but for some people it was going to be a problem. So the best way to avoid it would be to abstain from it. And if you'll notice, they went a little bit further than what Paul did here. They talked about the blood and the things that were strangled. This is a reference back, to what was going on back under the old law. These were things that were illegal in the old law also. So, they laid it out a little bit further in their guidance than Paul did here, because apparently the strangling and the blood and these other things were not really really an issue for the church there in Corinth. So, when these new converts, came in, they were commanded basically to abstain from these meats, but there were ones that were a little bit stronger in the faith that realized that it was just another piece of meat, and it wasn't really an issue. But for these new converts, this was really a problem and a real stumbling block that was out there. So wisely, the guidance that was given by the apostles was basically to abstain from these things, and that way everybody is going to be in good standing. But of course, as the Christians grew stronger, they got a more in-depth knowledge of that these idols, they weren't anything. They had no real meaning, and really they could eat that meat without their conscience being defiled by eating it. But still, the question arose: should those who can eat without defiling their conscience be prohibited from eating the meat? And that's kind of the question that's being asked here. And today we don't think about anything like that, because that's not an issue in the church today. There's other issues that give you the same concept, but eating the meat of idols is not one of them that would give it. So not only was the worship of the Gentiles a problem, but it was not only confined, like Bill said, to the Gentiles, but the Jews were also involved in a situation like this too. And you had Jewish sacrifices going on in Corinth. You had heathen sacrifices going on in Corinth, and here in the middle was the church that didn't do either one. Now, the scholars tell us that in Corinth there was basically two categories of Jews that this was an issue for. Also, you had the Karaites and the traditionalists, and this was the two sects of Jews that were that were there, and they had similar views on the meat that was sacrificed to idols, but there was a slight difference. Now, the Karaites was a sect of Jews who scrupulously held to the letter of the sacred writings, and they would only take their guidance from what the Old Testament said, and they didn't deviate from it. It was pretty much right by the book. Now, the traditionalists, they kind of followed the voice of the elders and the priests, what the guidance that they were given, and they didn't rely as much on the Old Testament law as they did the things that the priests were telling them. And we can some of their writings exist to this day, and especially some of the Karaites writings. I want to read you a couple of quotes from some of their writings that have been discovered over the years. One of them says, "It is unlawful to receive any benefit from any kind of heathen worship or from anything that has been offered to an idol." Another quote is, "It is unlawful to buy or sell an idol, and if by accident any such thing shall come into thy power, thou shalt derive no emolument from it." And the third quote is, "The animal that are disdained and prepared for the worship of idols are universally prohibited, and particularly those which bear the mark of the idol." Now, the traditionalists held pretty much to the last part there. They thought it was okay to eat the sacrifice to idols as long as the sacrifice didn't have the mark of the idol that was on the piece of meat that you were going to eat. So, yeah, basically, so one of the practices that some of the groups had back then is they would actually, like Bill said, brand the sacrifice before it was sacrificed on the altar. And obviously, if it was one of those, the traditionalists wouldn't eat it. But if it was just regular meat, then they really didn't have a problem with it. So that just kind of compounded the problem for the leadership of the church there at Corinth, because not only you had the issue with the Jews, but you also had the issue with the Gentiles. So they were kind of getting it from all different sides, and thus Paul here is going to have to give them some guidance here. So he goes on to say in this verse, we know that we all have knowledge, and this knowledge that Paul is referring to here is that the Christian knows that there is only one God. And these other gods are false gods, and basically they're nothing. They're small g gods, not capital G, the capital G God, God Jehovah. And they say, he says here, and that knowledge puffeth up. And he's telling them here that knowledge without the love of God, kind of puffs you up with pride, and you think, well, boy, I know a whole lot of stuff here, and these other poor people, they don't, they're not as smart as I am. And I mean, knowledge is a wonderful thing, but knowledge also has to be guarded by humility and love, so that it doesn't harm the person who has the knowledge, and also the other person that may not have as much knowledge as they've got. And we shouldn't get puffed up about the things that we know. And if we do know something, the way that we present that is very important, especially to somebody who doesn't understand some of the things that the person with the greater knowledge might understand. And if you depart that knowledge to the less enlightened, then they can get a little bit bitter about the way that they were treated. So Paul is telling them here, he says, but love edifies it. So the love of God, makes you strong in the faith and your Christian character. It makes you helpful to others, and it leads you to look for the good in all these different things, and even to the point that maybe you sacrifice some of the rights that you've got so that that others might not be defiled or be run away for some of the things that you say. Just because just because you can do something and have the ability and the right to do something doesn't always necessarily mean it's a good thing to do, because you need to consider, you need to consider others' feelings in a situation like that. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verses 2 and 3. If any man thinketh that he knoweth anything, he knoweth not yet as he ought to know. But if any man loveth God, the same is known by him. So a man may know a lot of things, but sometimes you don't know what you need to know. And that's kind of what Paul's saying here. You've heard me over the years talk about compound, complex, don't know, and don't know, they don't know. That's kind of the same situation here. You need to know what you know, and you need to know what you need to know. And that Paul is telling them here that you know a lot of things, but what you need to know is how to handle this situation, and you're not doing it in a way that is acceptable, because the love is missing here, and that's the important thing that they know. So you can be confident in your own wisdom, and the knowledge can be your guide, but it needs to be done in a loving and helpful way. Comments about those verses? All right, let's look at verse 4. Concerning therefore the eating of things sacrificed to idols, we know that no idol is anything in the world, and there is no God but one. So all the Christians should know that idols aren't anything. They're there, but they have no power, and they're just another thing out there. They're not really gods. And the things that are sacrificed to nothing are basically nothing, and it's really not an issue, because there is only one. There's only one true God, and that God is the foundation of the truth and of the Christian life. And without the true and living God, Christians are not going to be able to live a life and have an example of how to live and go about their life. So Paul is just reiterating the fact that there is only one God, and these idols are not really a factor. But that still does eliminate the problem about what all these other people think, and he's going to deal into that a little bit more as we go. Comments about that verse?
We talked about it so many times. Really a struggle for them. I mean, they've been in idolatry all their lives. That's all they knew. So now they're in Christianity.
Right.
Same way with the Jews. The Jews have been under the Old Testament. Now they're in Christianity, and so that urge to go back was there, and that's what he's really dealing with here. So he really a struggle for them.
Right.
More of a struggle for some, obviously, than others.
Right. And it became a struggle for the leadership of the church, because they were going to have to deal with this. And it once you get something ingrained in your mind, and it's almost habit. It's hard to break a habit.
I hate to bring up an analogy like this, but when the Catholics was all fish on Fridays, then when the Pope changed that, the old school Catholics, they not go with that.
You're absolutely right. I've got a bunch of my cousins down in Lexington are Catholic, and Aunt Dolly, she don't care what the Pope said. We have fish on Friday. I can remember when I was a little boy, and they'd come up to visit. We'd all go over to Mamaw's house, and they'd come on Friday evening. We had fish.
I know that they still eat fish fries in Our Lady of Fatima every Friday during Lent in Huntington. They've done it for years.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's a habit that's hard, and you think about it. We even do things by habit here. I mean, you think how many years that we had the Lord's Supper before the lesson. Nothing wrong with it. We've always done it that way, and then we changed it. Well, it took a little bit of getting used to, because in our mind, and I mean, I don't ever remember going to a Church of Christ that didn't do it that way. Just, and it doesn't tell us when we have to do it, but it's a matter of habit. It's hard to break. Yeah, yeah, and but I mean, we're all creatures of habit, and habits are hard to break. All right, let's go on and look at verses 5 and 6. For though there be that are called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as there are gods many and lords many, yet to us there is one God, the Father, of whom all things, and we unto him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom all things and we through him. So basically, the heathen and the people there in Corinth, the Gentiles, they made a distinction among their gods. They had superior gods who ruled in the heavens, and they had inferior gods that dwelt upon the earth or presided over the seas, the rivers. Everything had a god that was associated to it. And in the mind of the heathens, there were these classes of gods that had to be attended to. And of course, the heathen mythology, especially the Greek mythology, had a lot of developments, and it was very well developed here in Corinth. And the general rank and file person regarded this as a religious expression and almost a national ideal of their civilization, to which gods that they worshipped. And the Greek conception of every god is they were kind of independent, but everything that they did had a god that was associated with it and controlled that particular part of their life. And in that area, and pretty much throughout the ancient world in that time, pretty much every city had some type of guardian deity. And there was in the spring there were gods that were in control of the planting, and they worshipped those gods in the spring. And then when it came time for the crops to be harvested, there were gods that protected the crops, and they worshipped those gods. Or sometimes it was a goddess. And every element of the human action was controlled by these gods. And one of the things that, of course, Aphrodite had the big temple there, but that wasn't the only god that had a prominent role there in Corinth. And I started looking at it. You almost have to have a program to keep these gods straight. But one of the things I noticed as I was looking through all the different ones, they're all inbred. I mean, this one was the father of that one, and the daughter of this one was related. I mean, they're all intermingled. And it would be no wonder that the people there in Corinth had the ungodly life and did the sexual things that they did. All they had to do was follow the things that these gods were doing. I mean, Zeus was kind of the head god there. I mean, he was the god of the sky. He was kind of the king of the gods. And he had all kinds of kids from all kinds of women. And, these gods were kind of intermingled. Now, in Corinth, obviously the god that they worshipped the most was Aphrodite, and she was the goddess of beauty, love, desire, and pleasure. And we've talked about up to this point all the things that were going on and the things that happened at the temple. These were things that Aphrodite stood for, and the way that you worshipped her was with the beauty, the love, the desire, and the pleasure. That was the way that she was worshipped. Now, there was another god that was prominent there in Corinth, which was Athena, and she was the goddess of reason, wisdom, intelligence, skill, peace, warfare, battle strategy, and handicraft. Apollo was another one that was very prominent there in Corinth. And Apollo is the god of music, arts, knowledge, healing, plagues, prophecy, poetry, manly beauty, and archery. And he is the son of Zeus and Leto, and the twin brother of Artemis. Now, another one there was Demetri, and she was the goddess of grain, agriculture, harvest, growth, and nourishment. Then you had Kore, Kore, was the goddess of spring bounty. You had Hera, the goddess of marriage, mothers, and family. You had Poseidon, the god of the sea, rivers, floods, droughts, and earthquakes. And then you had another one, and I'll kill this name. I ain't going to tell you what. It's the god of medicine. I mean, it's words about that long, so I'll just not embarrass myself on that. But anyway, the god of medicine. So those were the primary gods also that were worshipped there in Corinth. So it was not only an issue at the temple, but there was also other areas in their life that they worshiped these particular gods, and they worshiped them in different ways. So it's no wonder that the people there in Corinth were so confused, and that's not even counting the patron saint mythical heroes that the town itself, the official gods of the town. There was 3 or 4 of them. So I mean, they were very steeped in all of these particular gods. Yeah, Asclepius, but it had another name too. And like I say, it's about that long.
Asclepius is that the snake in the round pole. That's the Asclepius symbol.
Yeah, that was one of them too. So I mean, there was a whole gob of them there that they worshipped. But Paul is telling them, and they know this, that there is only one God, and that one God, in contrast to all of these other gods, is all encompassing. Everything that God does, He is the true creator. He is the living God. He's the foundation of the universe. He possesses all the wisdom, all the power, and all the authority. So the Christian God, God the Father, God Jehovah, is all encompassing, and there's no need for all these other gods that the heathens were worshiping, because God the Father was the epitome of all gods, and had all the power, and created the heavens and the earth. And he's telling them that they are children of this God, and He's the one whom they live and move and have their very being. And that was discussed in Acts 17 and 28. And He's the one that gives all the blessings. He's the one that possesses all the strength and the power. And He watches over His children daily. And then he goes on to say that all of these blessings that God the Father had comes through Jesus Christ, who again is all things. God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit are all there on the same level. And Jesus gives us all the things that God gives us, and He's the one that through Him we obtain all the blessings that that God has, and the energy of God flows through Jesus. And we know that from John's writings, and in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made through Him, and without Him was not anything made that hath been made. So John explains this very well, that Jesus was there in the beginning. All things were done, through Him. Of course, we know later on in that chapter, he said, "Then the Word became flesh and dwelled among us." So, Paul is reminding them of the fact of the power of God, and also of the importance of Jesus, because the way that you get to the power of God is is through Jesus, and He performs all of these things on our behalf when He sits there at the right hand of God, speaking for us as it were. Comments about that verse? Okay, let's look at verse 7. Howbeit there is not in all men that knowledge, but some being used until now to the idol, eat as if a thing sacrificed to an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. So all men know this, or all the Christians should know this, that there is only one true and living God, and that they should all possess this knowledge, independent of these things that we're going along with the idols. But some who had been converted to Christ, they still had this lingering reverence, for these idols that they had worshipped for so long, and they still regarded this meat that was sacrificed as having some type of power, or it still had some type of reality to these people. And while they were actually completely free from the reverence for this idol, they still had in the back of their mind, they're eating this meat, and they have a bad feeling about it. They still can't get over this reverence that they have, that they've had pretty much all their life. And as a result of that, when they would see other people eating that, especially Christians, it defiled them, and it made them question their faith. And this was a problem. And this was kind of the root problem that that the elders there at Corinth was dealing with, and they wanted Paul's guidance here. And now we're kind of getting to the guidance. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 8. But food will not commend us to God, neither if we eat not, or are we the worse, nor if we eat are we the better. So Paul is basically starting out saying, if we do it, it's not a problem. If we do it, it's not a problem. And he understands that that this is just meat, and it's not sacred or anything like that. But he also realizes that it was something that was worshipped to idols, and knowing that is going to be a problem for the ones that still kind of hold that there too. And God wanted them to eat, and he food is a very important part. We have to do that, and it's God's will that we feed ourselves. But again, here we're endangering a situation where that some of the weaker members can be defiled because they didn't have that strong knowledge of what the situation were. But there were some that it wasn't a problem. They had that knowledge. It was just another piece of meat to them. But to the weaker ones, it was a real problem. So let's look at verse 9. But take heed lest by any means this liberty of yours becomes a stumbling block to the weak. So you have that liberty to do that, but you need to think of others, that what you do is causing a stumbling block for a brother or a sister who is weaker. And you need to consider their feelings. And even though you have the ability to do it, it's no big deal to you. It's a big deal to somebody else. And with that Christian love that he talked about earlier, you need to consider their feelings. And he's going to basically tell them pretty much abstain from it. Don't do it, because it's going to be a problem for somebody else. It's not going to be a problem for you, but it could lead a weaker brother who doesn't have quite the knowledge or the strength in Christ yet to put a stumbling block in front of them. And if we put a stumbling block in front of one of our brothers or sisters, it's on us. And we need to be we need to be cognizant of that fact. Comments about that verse? All right, let's move on to verse 10. For if a man sees thee who hath knowledge sitting at meat in an idol's temple, will not his conscience, if he is weak, be embroidered to eat things sacrificed to idols? So in other words, it's kind of like leadership by example. They see you doing that, and they say, well, I've got a problem with that, but maybe it's okay to do it. Well, maybe it is okay, but they just don't feel good about it. Those who have not freed themselves from the conscience of the idols, and who cannot eat that sacrificed meat without thinking about the worship and all that, and they see somebody who they consider has knowledge, and they kind of look up to them as a brother or a sister, and they see this, it's a real problem for them, and it puts some doubt in their mind, and it confuses them, and it becomes a stumbling block. So in verse 11 it says, for though they knowledge he that is weak perishes, the brother for whom sake Christ died. So you need to think about that. What is the effect going to be on the brother who doesn't quite have the strong knowledge, or maybe doesn't even have the knowledge at all? You can cause them to perish because of the things that you've done, and that's one of the people that Christ died for, and you're kind of leading them into a temptation, and maybe causing them their faith to waver, or maybe even cause them to fall away because of the confusion that you've caused in that situation.
I'll go back first again.
Okay.
Paul doesn't really sound condemnatory, but he kind of brings up the point. Why are our brethren going to idols' temples and eating?
Yeah, that's exactly.
I don't get that. And, the way he says it's a little light, but I think he maybe is trying to kind of condemn them. You're hanging around the wrong place, one brethren. And because of that, and because of the actions that you're taking in those places you don't need to be in the first place, you are really destroying these weaker, probably younger brethren. And you're absolutely telling them that it was okay to worship an idol. Maybe there's no difference between worship an idol and being a Christian. And that's where he's taught that, where he's kind of says at the end of verse 10 there that you're kind of destroying what they've been taught. You're blowing it away. And that's why they have a hang up.
That's what I was going to say. It'd be one thing to go to Bill's house and eat meat that's been offered to an idol. Actually going to the temple of the idol and taking, I wouldn't have a problem with that.
Yeah, and that's what he was referring to, earlier. So, when they had the picnics and stuff. That there was Christians there at the picnics.
Isn't that what the salt is at the temple where they burnt it?
Well, the way I understand it, you could do it at the temple, but then they would take the meat to. The way I understand this, apparently there was some type of pavilion or field or something next to the temple, a market. Well, I'm not even sure it was a market. I'm thinking it was almost like a picnic area, and they would take it from the temple into the picnic area, and they would eat it there, and the Christians were out there eating it with them. And then what was left over, they took to the market. Right. So we'll pick up there next. We'll pick up there next Lord's Day.
You really are.